Okay, very good morning, all of you. Let's start the today's topic that will discuss about the DBMS. So DBMS stands for Database Management System, and I have divided this DBMS chapter into two parts, part one and part two. In the part one, we'll discuss about the theoretical part, like what is a DBMS, what are the types of DBMS. I will deal with theory. Afterward, we'll design one project in that section part one, and after that, we'll start the query SQL in part two. So, before understanding the theoretical concept, we must discuss the basic idea of DBMS. For example, someone asks, please, can you design a database design for my project? And database designs are most important things. So for example, I want to create a e-commerce website, and at the end of that internship will create a different types of project. So suppose some student wants to, or some customer wants to create their database design. What are the database, how many tables are created, how will design the table, how will do the normalization, how will do the relationship, like that stuff. So maybe ऐसा हो सकता है कि at the starting of the internship you will get only theory, because the theory is a must, you need to must understand, and afterward we will start the practical theory related tasks. Okay, so don't worry about that. So let's begin. So what we will cover, we'll discuss. So these are the chapter we'll cover in the part one. In that we'll discuss the database, types of database. In that we'll discuss about the relational database only. There are different kinds of database available. Afterwards, we'll discuss about the database modeling and design. That means how we'll design the database, how we'll perform the database modeling, we'll do that. Okay, so there are certain rules are available to create a database design, and with the help of normalization, that means normalization from one, NF1, NF2, NF3, and after that relationship, we can build our own project. In that project, there is a no coding part. Okay, it's totally depend on the imagination. For example, I want to create a student table. Then just we need to think about that. What are the attributes or what are the columns we require? So for example, we required a student ID is there, student name is there, student what we say percentage is there, student address is there. So like that, we need to understand what are the different kinds of attributes are available. And that attribute must be a unique. So such a type of imagination we need to do. Afterward, we need to discuss what are the three levels of database. That means if you want to define a database, we need to understand the conceptual view, we need to understand the physical view, we need to understand the logical part. So like that stuff. And after everything will done, we will discuss about the some interview question in the theoretical point of view. Okay, in the theoretical point of view, we'll discuss about. So let's start. So let's begin the internship. In that, we'll discuss what is a database. So these are the theory. So what is a database? When we think about the database, it look like it is a way where we can store the data. For example, in the normal programming area, we discuss about the variable concept, we discuss about the constants. In that, we say the definition of variable. In that, we will discuss about that. A way is available. A variable is nothing but a way is available to store the data. Okay. So, like that same way, the database is nothing but a database is a collection of data where we can store the data. Again, question arises: how we will store the data? Does we have any rules and regulation? So yes, we have different kinds of rules and regulation to store the data, and it will depend on the types of data. For example, if your types is DBMS, DBMS is nothing but a database management system. See, so I will show you. For example, this one is your database, and this kind of data is available and you need to store that data. Okay, so we have different kinds of options are available. By using that we can store the data. Okay, assume that we have only one available called as the RDBMS. Okay, RDBMS, what is RDBMS? RDBMS A stands for Relational Database Management System. What is the word relational? That means the each attribute can communicate with each other, or that each attribute have a relationship with another attribute. That's why here word use RDBMS. RDBMS stands for Relational Database Management System. Now, if you want to store this data into the database, does we require any rule? For example, I want to store the data into database. So, like in the variable, we store the integer data. Like in variable, we store the fractional data. Like a variable, we can store the string data. So, like that, different kinds of options are available. Like so, for that, if you want to store the data, we cannot store this data directly into the database. So database is what? Database is nothing but it is used to store the data. DBMS, database management store. It is used to store the data. A database is nothing but collection of data. But इसके अंदर क्या store करना है? We'll discuss about that. See, it is a collection of schema. Schema is nothing but like we can say that skeleton. It is a collection of schema, table, queries, queries, report, views. These are related to the processing. Okay, and other objects and other objects. So what is a schema? Schema is nothing but skeleton. That means in that section, if your data, if you want to store the data, then we need to define the schema. So what is a schema? For example, here we required the different types. The data will be stored in the tabular format. In that, column is there, rows are there. So that will define the schema. These are the columns and these are the rows. So now we can store that data. That means, see, if we want to store relational data, then we require to use the schema. Okay. So in that section, I will use attribute as ID. In that section, I will use attribute as a name. In that section, I will use attribute as address. And afterwards, I can able to store the data. That means, can you think a DBMS? There are different kinds of DBMS. That means different kinds of databases are available. Now we'll discuss only about the relational database. Okay, make a note of that. We'll discuss about the relational database. So let's think about that. If we are trying to store this data into the DBMS, that means we required a row and a column. We required a row and column. Without and row and column, can I able to store the data into the relational database? The answer is no. And major companies are working on the RDBMS, and less nowadays the another database type we'll discuss about in few minutes. Another database type called as a NoSQL will work majorly in Cassandra and other databases. Okay, so the difference between that, because for the RDMS, when we use a data to store into the DBMS, we require to use a tabular format. We require to use column and row. But see the future data, for example, if a developer don't know what data will comes, for example, Facebook is there, Facebook comments is there, tweets are there. So assume that if a developer don't know about the data and they want to store the data, then is it feasible to store the data in RDBMS? The obvious answer is no, because the RDBMS will store the predefined schema. In that we require a data type, in that we require a schema. The data will be formatted into rows and column. So how we can store the data? Okay, so यूजर कुछ भी एंटर कर सकता है फेसबुक के अंदर, ट्विटर के अंदर, तो फॉर्मेट we cannot able to follow the format. So for that, the RDBMS is not fit for that. Okay. So for that, they are using a NoSQL. In that, the data is different. So we can store the future data also, and there is no restriction. The data will stored in different type of format, like column format में store हो सकता है. Yeah, there is no need to define a schema simply. So when we think there is no defined to schema, schema is anything but like data types. Attributes के data types वगैरह पूरा mention करके रखना है. That term called as a schema. Okay, so make a note of that. And we'll do while practical, while performing the practical. So आपको ये पूरा समझ में आएगा. But just understand the what is a database. So database is nothing but it is a collection of data. Simply, when anyone asks what is the definition of database, we need to specify A database is nothing but it is a collection of data. Okay. So it is a collection of schema, tables, query, reports, view. So these are the query. Query is nothing but, for example, if someone wants to retrieve the data from the database, someone wants to retrieve the data from the database, or we can say that a table. For that we require a queries. Okay, for that we require a queries. These are the reports, views करने के लिए, reports देखने के लिए required, and other. So data are typically organized to model aspect of reality in way that supports processing requiring information such as modeling. So we'll discuss about the modeling and design, the availability of rooms in hotel in way that supports finding in hotel with vacancies. Just it's an theory part. Just assume that it is a database. Database is nothing but it is a collection of data. And here I give the example. Okay, here I give the example. What is a database? So such a modeling the availability of rooms in hotel in way that supports finding hotel with vacancy. So ऐसा मॉडल हम बना सकते हैं कि in that we can check the availability of rooms in a hotel. So we can find out the how many vacancies are there, how many empty rooms are there. Okay. So types of database this is the most important, and we will discuss a lot on that types of database. So in the database model, there are three different kinds of databases. First of all, we'll discuss about their names only, and afterwards we'll discuss about their properties. The first one is RDBMS. RDBMS stands for Relational Database Management System. Okay. So here I gave the name Relational Database Management System. So second one is a OODBMS. It's very good database, and I did the very lots of practical on the OODBMS. So OO stands for Object Oriented Database Management. So you already did that practical in the diploma level. For example, advanced Java is there. In that Hibernate chapter is there. In that we create the HQL Hibernate query language. By using that, we can create the databases. Okay. So I had maybe you heard about that in the diploma level Hibernate language. And third one is a NoSQL database. Okay. So NoSQL means not only SQL. Don't worry about that. So ऐसा लगता है कि NoSQL मतलब SQL ही नहीं use करना है. So without SQL, we cannot able to perform the database related operation. What is SQL? SQL stands for Structured Query Language, where we can pass the query and we get the data. Okay. By using that query, we can also store the data. So like that. So there are three different kinds of databases around. RDBMS is there, OODBMS is there, and NoSQL database is there. Okay. So what about the which is the most secure? So when we think about that, all these three databases are secure. So RDBMS is also secure, object-oriented database is also secure, and NoSQL database is a secure because the main aspect of a database is security. When we store the data into the database, the main aspect of any programming language is security. Okay, so don't worry about the security. Then what is the other point which will segregate or differentiate these databases? See, these databases, for example, if you want to data, we will discuss about the different kinds of data also. Okay, so first there are different kinds of data. Structured data is there, unstructured data is there, and semi-structured data. Okay. What about the structured data? The data is in well formatted in the tabular format. Okay, tabular matlab table format. For example, ID is there, name is there. So, okay. So we are discussing the different kinds of databases. Okay, so in that discussing different kinds of data. Okay, there are three types of data. So the first one is a structured data, another one is unstructured data, and third one is semi-structured data. Okay, and we'll discuss about that data. So see, what is the structured data? Structured data is nothing but the data will be available into well formatted, or we can say that in the tabular format. Okay, So this is an example of structured data, and the best example of structured data is a DBMS. All okay. So the data will be available in the structured format. Format is equals to ID, name. Here we can say the address. So data will be available in the tabular format, and these are the rows and these are the columns. Okay, तो tuples के साथ में आपको data available होता है. That term called as a structured data. Okay, and इसका best example होता है DBMS. Data will be stored in the well structured format called as a DBMS. Another type of data is called as a semi-structured data. Okay, so in that some case data will be available in a proper format, or we can say that data will be available in the semi-structure. Okay, and the best example is Excel. Okay, so in that DBMS, the structured data schema is a mandatory. What is a schema? We need to specify this attribute. We need to specify this attribute. Without that attribute, we cannot able to store the data. So for that DBMS or structured data, we require to use a schema. We require to use a schema. So if you want to use the DBMS or structured data, schema is a mandatory term. Okay. Semi-structured data. In the semi-structure, the example is Excel sheet. Okay. Assume that the data will be in the form of tabular format. ऐसा ही होता है इसके अंदर में. But the difference is that here we did not use schema. Excel sheet में हम schema कभी use करते हैं क्या? नहीं. Okay. In that tabular format होता है, but इसके अंदर schema use नहीं होता है. That means in that we did not specify attribute with data type. Attribute with data type. Okay, so here in the structured database we define the attribute with data type, but in unstructured data type, in that we did not specify the schema. That means we did not specify the attribute. So this one is a Excel sheet. Okay, example. Unstructured, unstructured and data type is semi-structure. It's not unstructured, it's semi-structure. Okay, fine. This is about what? Semi-structure. Best example is Excel sheet. So another kinds of data is called as unstructured. Okay. In that case, in the unstructured data, there is no need to define the tabular format because the data is all in format of raw data. In that case, the data we get in the raw format. That means just we use a database, and that we will store the data in anywhere. Okay, so in the form of objects only. So that term called as a unstructured data. That term called as a unstructured. And the best example we can say that we can understand, see the Facebook or Twitter. So in that case, so for example someone posts the one what we say that the someone posts the photos and some article on Facebook, and a lots of what we say Facebook another accounts will comment on this photo or an article. Okay, and that article will be stored in a database. Also that comments also stored in the database. अभी comments can depend हो सकते हैं कि for example I will write nice article, someone say bad article, someone say it's very good article, someone say it's very good but not so enough, like that stuff. They will write anything. Okay, and that will be stored in the database, but we don't know about the data type. Data type क्या होगा we don't about that. There's some Facebook user will use some digits, some Facebook user use some special symbols. So how will decide that? So the data will be a unstructured data that will be stored in a database, and the best example is for that is Cassandra database. It is a majorly used for the big data. Okay, so had you heard about the big data concept, in that the huge amount of data we are able to deal by using the Hadoop technology, and it's very good technology. It can handle a huge amount of data with collection of similar machines, and they combine the machines and they will generate a new uh, powerful machine, and after that they resolve the it is an example of distributed computing system. So Cassandra is the best for that. Okay, so here about unstructured. So why we discuss this data? Understand the different kinds of data. Revise this quickly. What is the DBMS? So what is the structured data? Here is a called as a structure. Discuss about structured data. Structured data is nothing but in that we will use a tabular format and schema. It is mandatory to use the schema. Without a schema, we cannot able to say that it is a structured data. And the best example is a database. Okay, so in that schema is a defined with data type. Make a note of that. Schema nothing but the attribute is a defined with a data type. So here I am using an attribute ID. That means ID is used with integer type. Name is defined with, for example, character, varchar is there. Okay, address is varchar, and contact number is a number, like that. So we are defining this attribute with the data type. That's why we call it as a structured data. Semi-structure, in that a schema is not defined, but data will be available in the tabular format. Make a note of that. And unstructured means what? Data is not defined in proper format. Okay, so data will be stored in the form of object, and once it will come, it will be stored. Okay, and the best example is a Cassandra. So it is also called as a NoSQL. Means not only SQL नाम पे नहीं आना है ना. इसका बेस्ट एग्जांपल क्या होता है? Cassandra. So these are the different kinds of databases that are available. And now, what is the advantage? What is the fact? See, RDMS is the best database. Don't worry about that. Okay. But ये जो RDBMS है ना, so when we think about RDBMS, ये ना future data. For example, if the data type is, if the schema is defined, that means we cannot able to store the data. Another type of data. Okay. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आईडी की जगह आईडी आना चाहिए, नेम की जगह नेम आना चाहिए, डिपार्टमेंट की जगह डिपार्टमेंट, एड्रेस की जगह एड्रेस, कॉन्टैक्ट की जगह कॉन्टैक्ट. सो दैट्स व्हाई RDMS is used. Okay, so that means is perfectly designed, and according to that design we need to store the data. ऐसा नहीं होगा कि फेसबुक का डेटा, फॉर एग्जांपल किसी ने कमेंट की जगह खाली नंबर लिख लिया है, कॉल मी ऑन दिस नंबर. सो अभी उसका डेटा टाइप चेंज हो गया है, किसी ने लिख दिया जस्ट टेक्स्ट में, तो उसका डेटा टाइप चेंज हुआ है. सो दिस बाकी परफॉर्मेंस वगैरह ओके है, कुछ भी प्रॉब्लम नहीं RDBMS. बट व्हेन वी कंपेयर दिस RDBMS विथ NoSQL has infinite limit. Okay, in that we can collect the future data also, and also the performance of NoSQL is more as compared to the RDBMS. Okay, the performance of NoSQL database is more as compared to the RDBMS because it is a relational database. It will check, for example, if you want to retrieve the person employee name Ravi, for example, if you have a table employee, and if you want to retrieve the name of that employee Ravi, okay, so it will check each and every entry. It will check each and every entry in RDBMS, but in SQL it will check by using some techniques. In that will check एक keyword consider किया जाएगा, and it will check that keyword with another word. So automatically NoSQL commands or NoSQL database performance will be increased. अभी दूसरा एक concept है इसके अंदर कि difference है. RDBMS वर्टिकल स्केलिंग बहुत जल्दी करता है, बट NoSQL हॉरिजॉन्टल स्केलिंग करता है. फॉर एग्जांपल, व्हाट इज अ स्केलिंग? ओके, स्केल अप एंड स्केल डाउन. इन द लिनक्स वी ऑलरेडी डिस्कस अबाउट द concept of scale up and scale down and horizontal scale. अभी स्केलिंग में भी दो टाइप्स होते हैं. वर्टिकल स्केलिंग होता है एंड हॉरिजॉन्टल स्केलिंग होता है। दोनों में हॉरिजॉन्टल स्केलिंग के अंदर इनसाइड दैट हॉरिजॉन्टल स्केलिंग स्केल अप नाम का एक कंसेप्ट होता है, स्केल डाउन नाम का एक कंसेप्ट होता है, एंड वर्टिकल स्केलिंग में भी स्केल अप एंड स्केल डाउन। Okay. So make a note of that. RDBS is majorly focused on the vertical scaling, whereas NoSQL will be majorly follow the horizontal scaling. डिफरेंस क्या है वर्टिकल स्केलिंग एंड हॉरिजॉन्टल स्केलिंग में? सी, वर्टिकल स्केलिंग मतलब वी नीड टू अपग्रेड आवर हार्डवेयर repeatedly. Okay, for example, right now we have only 100 GB of data. Later on, it will be increased up to 200 GB. Later on, it will be increased on 400 GB. That means the size will increase. If size will be increased, we need to change the hardware. So that means the hardware or configuration. So hardware related part, random access related part will increase the vertical scaling. What about horizontal scaling? Horizontal scaling is nothing but if your VM virtual machine or if your instance is not capable to handle the data, then automatically another instance will be created horizontally. If that two instances not able to handle the queries, then automatically one instance will be created horizontally. That means इसके अंदर systems up होते हैं and इसके अंदर hardware up होता है. वर्टिकल स्केलिंग में हार्डवेयर अप होता है, हॉरिजॉन्टल स्केलिंग में सिस्टम होता है. So that's why there is a reason no SQL database will has higher performance as compared to DBS. We are not discussing which is the best, which is the bad. For structured database, RDBMS is the best option. We cannot able to say, we cannot able to complain against the RDBMS. Okay. But for unstructured database, see, databases will be categorized into two types. So these databases are categorized into different types, RDBMS and NoSQL. Make a note of that. But make it understand, if your data is a structure, if your data is a structure, then we have only one option called as RDBMS with the security. If your data is a non-structure or we can say the unstructured, then we have only one option, no SQL. Don't worry about that. ये बहुत heavy लग रहा है, theoretical है, सर के ऊपर से जा रहा है. While doing the practical, we got all the concept. But before starting the practical, we are trying to understand the concept of database. And third one is OODBMS, object oriented programming. Okay, in the object oriented programming, had you heard about the Java? In the advanced Java, there is a technology called as a Hibernate, and I think so. Only 1 to 2% of the Java program are switching for the Hibernate technology. In that, they are creating the entity relationship management. By using that, they will create the database. They will create the table, and inside that table they can define the attributes by using this technology. Okay, so have you heard about the setter and getter method? In that we are defining the variable, and by using that variable we can define the set method for variable and get method for the variable. I will show an example. Assume that I have id as a variable name, so I will use set id method. So we will use int set id around bracket open close curly brace open, and I will use return type as a get id. So int get id round bracket open close. So by using set id method and get id method, we can define the variables. Okay, so by using that we can create the Hibernate. Yeah, Hibernate का बहुत interesting advanced Java. We can create the database. Okay, but only few people are using the object oriented database. So we'll majorly focus on the RDBMS and NOS. Okay. So now what is the relational database? Now we're trying to focus on the only relational database. So what is a relational database? Okay. A relational database is a set of tables that are linked together in meaningful way. So it will be totally depend on the relational. It will be totally depend on the concept of relational database. Okay. A relational database is a set of database में अंदर क्या होगा? Multiple tables are available that are linked together with meaningful way called as a relational database, and this is a very useful definition for that. A relational database model. Who developed the relational database model? It developed by the Edgar F. at IBM in the 1970. Okay, he is a researcher in the IBM company. IBM is a major mode company, and that he proposed the model of what? The model of relational database in the year of 1970. Let's think about that. In the year of 1970, the relational model is a design. Before that, how the old, the historical people, or you can say that is history, they maintain the records. See, this is everything about we need to maintain the record. For example, employee is there. We need to store the employee details. For example, one company is there, or one production company is there. In that they are designing a car, so we need to maintain the car details, spare parts of that car, so everything. So in the previous years, how they maintain the databases or data records, we cannot imagine that. So in the 6000 BC, 600 BC, 800 BC, or we can say that in the year of 1000, in the year of 200, like that stuff, we cannot imagine that how they store the data. But make a note of that. You need to understand who developed the relationship model, RDBS model. So make a note of that. The author name is Edgar F. Ford. We can say that the Edgar Ford in the year of 1970 and IBM. Make a note of that. Now, now we'll discuss about the terminology, and here I design a basic idea. Just understand करने के लिए design किया है और ये मैंने WordPad में बनाया. Don't worry about that. We'll do the practical because right now we cannot able to do the practical. We did not install the MySQL, or we can say that any open source database. So we do the practical, but just we need to understand the terminology. Make a note of. ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है हमें कि आगे जाना है फास्ट फास्ट कवर करना है. डोंट वरी अबाउट दैट. विल कवर वेरी शॉर्टली, एंड जो भी समझ में आएगा उस हिसाब से हम कवर करेंगे. डोंट वरी अबाउट. व्हाट इज द रूल? Now we discuss about the data types. There are three different types of databases are available. Also we discuss about the data also. Now we need to understand the terminology. In the database there is a term called as a row. इसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. रिलेशनल डेटाबेस के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. Okay, what about the NoSQL database? In that, does we require a row? Don't worry about that. In that case, we does not require a schema. The data will be stored in the form of object. So don't worry about that. Now we did think about only relational database management system. So in that there is a term called as a row. In that there is a term called as a row. A row represents a single atom and it is often called as a tuple or record. That means row को alternate name क्या है? एक तो उसे tuple भी कहा जाता है, tuple भी कहा जाता है, और we can say that record भी कहा जाता है. Okay, so assume that you need to define one database. In that we need to define one table. In that table we need to define some attributes. So these are the attributes. See, these are the columns. Columns क्या होते हैं? ये attribute होते हैं, and that must be a unique. These are the attributes and these are the tuples. Okay, tuples, records and data. Okay. So data will be in well formatted. Assume that if it is a relational database, this one is an ID. In that ID, the data type is a number. Can I able to store the data type is a number? Can I able to store the department name, a person name in the section of ID? Specify your answer. Can I able to store the username or name of employee inside that ID? Is it possible?
No, sir.
No, it is not possible. What is the reason behind that? Because this attribute is specially designed for integer number. This attribute name contains alphabets. Alphabet matlab string. So we can store anything inside that. When we think about the department, it is also varchar or character or string is there. We can store anything inside that. Make a note of that. While representing the data or while storing the data into the database, we need to store the data according to the schema. We cannot able to add while doing the practical. हम टेबल बनाने के बाद में हम ट्राई करेंगे कि different kinds of data push करने के लिए database में we get the error. Will get the error definitely. So what is a terminology? In that terminology, we discuss about the row. A row represents a single atom. A row represents a single atom, and it's often called as a tuple, tuple or record. Make a note of that. So ये जो horizontal दिखाई दे रही है ये row है. In that I made the entry one Arvind CSC. This one is the email ID and this one is the address. Second two Ravi ANTC. This one is email ID and this one is the address. So these are the rows. Make a note. Here we use some rules while designing the relational database rules. So in that just I will list out and we will wait for today's lecture. So what is the reason behind that? Because I use a Cisco WebEx demo version right now. But in the morning region I use a different paid version, but there is a maybe problem. I will check that. So right now we don't have a time to conduct the lecture. Just we get only 45 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. So maybe there is a uh, problem. After that the meeting will automatically close, so for that we cannot able to extend the lecture. So I will resolve that problem as early as possible, and tomorrow onwards, if we did not resolve the problem on Cisco Webex, so we'll do the practical, or we'll do the lecture on Google Meet. Okay, don't worry about it. So just will define use some relational database rules. So what are the relational database? We think about the relational database in that the rows and columns are used, some schema is used. Okay. So right now we cannot perform the practical. So just imagine that कि database ऐसा ही होता है. Employee table is there. In that tuples are there, records are there, columns are there. These ID, name, department, email, and address. These are the called as attribute. Attribute must have a unique. These are the rules and regulation. So while creating the relational database, what are the rules are available? Here we list out the rules. Here we list out the rules. We'll discuss one by one. Each table has a unique name. Each table contains multiple rows. First, each table has a unique name. टेबल का डेटाबेस के अंदर जो नाम होगा वो क्या होगा, यूनिक होगा. दैट मीन्स रिडंडेंट होगा क्या, redundant होगा क्या, when we think about redundant that means what, repeated. So assume that in the college SYCSC is there or TYCSC is there. So TYCSC repeat होगा क्या कॉलेज में, no. TYCSC नहीं होगा, TAC होगा, TY EEP होगा, TY मैकेनिकल होगा. दैट मीन्स ये जो टेबल्स होते हैं दैट टेबल नेम मस्ट बी यूनिक. दैट टेबल नेम मस्ट बी यूनिक. ओके, इसके अंदर चेंजेस नहीं होंगे. सेकंड इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग, each table contains multiple row. Yeah, once we created the table, that table contains multiple row. Okay, empty name, table contains multiple row. Each row in a table must be unique. Each row in table is unique. ये जो रो होता है फॉर एग्जांपल डुप्लीकेट वैल्यूज होता है, इसके लिए थोड़े से रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन होते हैं. सो द ईच रो इन द टेबल मस्ट बी यूनिक. ओके, सो दैट विल बी अ यूनिक. डुप्लीकेट भी हो सकते हैं, बट देयर आर सम कॉन्सेप्ट कॉल्ड एज अ प्राइमरी की, फॉरेन की. सो इसलिए इसकी वजह से बाय यूजिंग दिस कॉन्सेप्ट प्राइमरी की एंड फॉरेन की, the deduplication will be removed. So don't worry about that. Okay. So each row in table is unique. Third, fourth, each table has a key to uniquely identify the row. Each table has a key to uniquely identify the row. So इसीलिए हम use करते हैं primary key. So primary key is a way to available by using that we can uniquely identify the row. So row के लिए unique identification करने के लिए हम primary key use करते हैं. So primary key हम किसी भी attribute को दे सकते हैं, and by using that we can easily identify. By using primary key we can also retrieve the data. Make a note of that. We'll discuss about that. What is a primary key? What is a foreign key? Don't worry about that. So just understand this concept or list out ये table किया तो भी चलेगा. Okay. So next concept is also primary key और इसके अंदर मैंने लिखा है पूरा. Each column in the table has a unique attribute name. ये columns जो होते हैं ना ये ID, name, department, email and address, that must be a unique. That must be a unique. That means same attribute नहीं होना चाहिए. Okay. So why same attribute नहीं होना चाहिए? Say assume that Why we use backend? Why we use database? Why we use database? Database used to store the data, but when a developer develop one application, and if the developer wants to store as well as retrieve the data, if that developer wants to store or retrieve the data, at that case, if attribute name is the same, then डेवलपर के लिए प्रॉब्लम्स क्रिएट हो सकती है स्टोर एंड रिट्रीव करने के लिए. सो मेक अ नोट ऑफ दैट व्हाइल स्टोरिंग द डेटा these attribute names are must be unique. So these are the list, and tomorrow we'll discuss about in detail how the each table name is unique, how multiple rows will be stored, like that we'll discuss about tomorrow. We get the one reminder, only 5 minutes are remaining because I took the only demo version. So let's stop for the lecture. If you have any query, let me know. I will share this PPT up to relational operator. So if you have any query regarding that, what kinds of database is available, what kinds of relational DB is there, or what is the difference between structured data, unstructured data, or semi-structured data, let me know about that. If you have any query, we'll discuss about that. Close the session. Does anyone have query? Audible to all?
No query, sir.
Okay, so I will share the videos also. Just watch that because it is a theoretical point, so don't worry about that. Okay, so we'll close that session. So just 1 minute, I will take the attendance. Take the snapshot for that. Done. So we took the attendance also. So just I will share that video.